This is session number 12 of the Sales Mastermind podcast. Today in the hot seat, we have Craig Sherlock. Hit the music. Hello and welcome to the Sales Mastermind podcast. Get ready to harness the power of the Mastermind community and take your sales to the next level. I'm your host, Jonathan Stewart. Today's question comes from Craig Sherlock. He asked on Facebook, what are some ways to hold salespeople accountable? So I think this is a great question. A lot of times here in the podcast, we've talked about sales from the salesman's point of view, but this is a great way for us to reach out to those of us who are also sales managers, and you need to know how to keep your people accountable. And if you're like most sales managers, you don't want to micromanage your sales team, because that's not very effective for your time. But you want to be able to keep tabs on them and keep them accountable for the results that they have so you can keep your sales process going. So I'm going to give you guys 6 tips that will be helpful. And Craig Sherlock, these 6 tips hopefully will be very applicable to your particular needs with your sales team. But also the rest of us, I hope this is also very helpful. But 6 tips to keep your sales team accountable without having to micromanage them. So the very first tip I have for you is to make sure that you have a good CRM tool, which is a customer relationship management tool in place, not only for your sales team to be more efficient so they can make sure that they never miss a lead and that when they do go into sales calls, they can look up their past conversations with that customer and they know the last email they sent and they can keep track of things like that. Not only for that, for the salespeople's good and for closing more sales that way, but you know what? On the accountability side, a good CRM tool allows you to track the activity of your salespeople. And so, you might not be able to tell that a salesperson has kind of slowed down and maybe they're getting disengaged or maybe they're not quite making the same amount of calls that they were before and they're not following up like they should be until it's too late. Or the month's already over, you've looked at the sales and you realize that one of your salesmen had not done as much that month. And then you'll know then and it's too late to fix it until the next month. But what's cool about a CRM tool, a customer relationship management tool, is the administrator or the manager of the sales team can go in and pull reports anytime they want, and they can see what kind of activity that their sales team is having. So for instance, you could track how many calls, how many emails, how many visits that were being made by your sales team. And so you could go in and you could pull the records and you could say, okay, they're making a good amount of sales calls. They are making a lot of emails still, and they are making a lot of visits, but their revenue is still down. And then you could go and say, well, okay, how's their pipeline? Do they have a good pipeline of customers for the future? And then you could look at how are their follow-up rates. Are they doing a good job following up? Are they keeping good notes on these accounts? Are they putting good notes? Are they asking the right questions? And you could also find out what their close rate for those sales were. So I believe a CRM tool is probably going to be your greatest accountability tool, and it'll serve a double purpose, as I mentioned, to keep your sales team on track, to keep them from losing a lead or just getting too busy and forgetting about a lead. It'll also allow you to make sure that you're keeping your team accountable. They will also know that you have access to this, so they will make sure they stay on top of it. The second tip is to make sure that you have very set, specific, measurable goals for your sales team to achieve every month. So you want to make sure that you let them know what it looks like to be successful. You want them to have something to work towards every month. Now, I do think this is key to make sure that you allow the salespeople to actually have part in the process of setting these goals. In the past, my managers have always allowed me to be a part of setting my goals. So they let me know of numbers from last year and kind of what some of the company goals were, and they let me be a part of the process to submit what I thought I would want to work towards for the year. And what this does is it allows your salespeople to actually have a little bit of ownership in the goals. And as they go through them and as they approach them during the year, they will feel like, you know what, this wasn't something that was just pushed upon me, but I actually had a part in this, and so they're more apt to want to meet those goals. But also by having these goals, this allows you to keep them accountable because you could say, this is what you should have been for this month and you're not there. This is where you should have been for this quarter and you're not there. This is where you should have been for this week and you're not there, and so you can keep them accountable. And if they do good and they're making the goals, then your accountability will be congratulating them. So you need to make sure that these goals, you want to make sure that you have 3 types of goals at least. The first one for sales would make sure you have a revenue goal. So you need to make sure that you set for the month of July, I want you to be able to do this and this based on what we talked about and based on what you said you would want to do. You want to make sure these revenue goals are clearly laid out for the year. You want to make sure these revenue goals are clearly laid out for the quarter, for the month. You can even do weekly goals to really just break it down. Break that yearly goal up into bite-sized pieces so that it can be reached and so you can keep on track of it. So revenue goals. You also need to secondly have volume goals. So this would not even just be sales volume alone, but this could be new accounts. You could say I want a certain amount of new accounts opened if you're setting up accounts like a recurring basis, like a territory. Or you could say if it's a call center or even an outside sales team, I want you to make at least this many calls a week. You could say I want you to at least have this many new leads in your pipeline every week, every month, every quarter, every year. And so you need to make sure that you not only have revenue goals, but you want to make sure you keep that pipeline full and keep people coming in, new, fresh people. And so keep those volume goals in there too and keep track of those. The third category I think you need to make sure that you follow and you measure with your team is to make sure that you have margin goals. So not every sales team will have this ability, but in most cases, the salesperson does have a little bit of say in the cost of goods sold. So it might be making a special agreement with certain accounts or maybe price matching a competitor to get an account or whatever that would be. But sometimes you do change the price for specific customers. But you do want to make sure, as any company wants to remain profitable and you know that you have to maintain a certain margin, you want to make sure that you have these goals clearly set in front of your sales team that they need to keep margin at a certain level. So have them set specific and measurable goals. This will allow you to stay up on top of them and they will stay accountable to you in this way. The third way to keep your team accountable is to make sure you have regular monthly performance reviews. This is something that was done really, really well in my days when I worked at Sears. Our manager would sit down with us once a month and we would look at different metrics in different areas and how we met our goals. And we would go over and we'd talk about specific things that we needed improvement on, specific things that we were doing well with. And we would both meet together and make a plan and set a goal for the next time that we would meet. What this allows you to do as a manager is this allows you to catch problems very early on, before a quarter is over, before a year is over. And you can catch these problems and train the people in your sales team to solve these problems on the go. It also makes sure that they know they're going to be accountable to you every month. And everyone wants to succeed. Everyone wants to please people. Some people, of course, are more people pleasers than others, but everyone wants to succeed, find acceptance, and feel like they've succeeded. And so they're going to want to be at their best during these monthly performance reviews. So that could push them to do better and sell more product and meet those goals. So those regular performance reviews would be based on those set specific measurable goals that we talked about in the second tip. The fourth tip is to make sure that you conduct regular surveys and calls on either their customers they've dealt with or the accounts that they're working on. You want to maybe randomly call, or if you're close enough to the sales territory, visit some of the contacts or some of the accounts that they have and just ask them from their point of view, how is this salesperson treating you? How are they taking care of you? How was the sales process? And you can find out firsthand just some inside knowledge of how that particular salesperson is doing. With these regular surveys or calls on these accounts, you'll be able to figure out where you can train this person and coach this person to do either better, or you can congratulate them for doing good in a certain way and use that as a training point for other people. And so you can really stay on top of your sales team by finding out what the people they serve and the people they've sold to, how they really feel about it. This could be done in person. This could be done by phone call. You could even have an automated survey sent out by email. You could have other technology in place. You can even hire teams to call and do this if you have a large sales team. Otherwise, I think it'd be great if you could do some in person or your own phone calls yourself to get firsthand information. So conduct regular survey calls on these accounts. The fifth tip for you to keep your team accountable is I would recommend, if time allows, that you would maybe do ride-along visits with your salespeople. So if you have an outside sales team, you would want to, every 6 months, go out for a couple days with your salesperson and go to some of the accounts, have them pitch a certain product or have them go through a sales presentation and be there to hear it. See the reaction of the person there and just kind of see how they're out there doing. And you'll be able to coach them right there on the spot. Now, obviously for inside sales teams, the equivalent of this would be to either listen in on a phone call or to actually record phone calls and go over those later. I know in the company that I'm working for now, the call center manager, he actually, especially for new associates, will put a second headset on and listen in on how they're dealing with the customers and how they are going through the sales process. And after each sales call, he'll give them some feedback. Some of that will be coaching. Some of that will be like, good job on this, but you need to make sure that you do this. And that really allows him to stay on top of the sales team and to make sure that they are doing what they should. And so ride-along visits with their salespeople. If you're an outside sales manager, if you're an inside sales manager, then you want to make sure that you either listen in or record phone calls that are made into your call center or outbound calls. The sixth and final tip that I have for you on keeping your sales team accountable is to make sure that you regularly train your sales team on the new products or the new services. But also not only train them, but this is where the accountability comes in, is make sure that you test them on their knowledge. You as the manager should know more about your product than your salespeople, and thus you should be able to ask them and maybe even go through acting like you're a customer and ask them specific questions to see how they answer. And then you could offer in, if they didn't do well answering that question, the knowledge they need and maybe give them some advice. But regularly train and test them on their product knowledge. Make sure that your salespeople can answer all the common questions that they will be asked. You're not going to be able to train people to answer every question, but they should be coached on some of the common questions. So these are the 6 tips I have to keep your sales team accountable. Once again, that first tip, having that CRM tool in place, I think that's the biggest and most important tool. If you didn't do any of these other things, that's the most important. Have that CRM tool in place. Now, I just want to give some closing advice here before we finish up this podcast. Just basically advice on keeping your sales team motivated. And, it all starts from the beginning. You want to make sure that you hire self-motivated people. You don't want to have to constantly be motivating your people in that sense of the word. But you need to keep in mind that even self-motivated people can get, after they've been doing a job for a while and they can get kind of tired, they can lose some of their passion and they can lose some of their motivation. So although you want to hire self-motivated people that are maybe kind of entrepreneurial in spirit and they don't need you to be micromanaging them, you want to make sure that you have some ways to keep people motivated. So one of the ways I know that it motivates me is to have a little bit of freedom, having a little bit of control over pricing, and being able to make a call on a deal right there without having to go in and get permission. So some of those little things like that will keep people motivated and keep them feeling ownership. But also, as I mentioned before, if you want to keep them motivated, don't micromanage people. Micromanaging people will demotivate them. But you don't also want to completely leave people on their own. You want to make sure there's a balance to this. So don't micromanage, but also don't leave them to just be on their own, out on the wild frontier, just all by themselves, like somebody that doesn't have anybody to be over them. You want to have that balance in the middle. Give them goals, give them specific things they need to do, and make sure that you follow up with them on these things, but do let them have some freedom. Another way to keep people motivated would be to make sure that you reward their results, but not just their time spent. So an example of this is you might have a salesperson that spends 60, 70 hours a week selling, and maybe his sales are half that of somebody who spends half that time and is just more effective. You want to reward results. So people don't just do busy work for the sake of being busy, but you want them to have results. Another way to keep your sales team motivated, and really this is the last way that I have for you right now, but also the most important, is to make sure that you give them a good pay incentive. So what I say this would be is a good, generous commission structure. Allow them to share in the win. So if they make a really good sale, then they actually make a good paycheck. I personally, and I know this is a very debatable subject, I think that your salespeople should have some kind of salary set that they can rely on every month, but they should also have a good portion of their income tied to a good, aggressive commission structure that allows them to really make their own raises and make their own money. The salary should be enough to keep them, living and basic expenses paid for, but the commission should be enough there to keep them hungry. So this is what I have for you today, Craig, and for the rest of the Sales Mastermind community. I hope these 6 tips and this little bit of advice here about keeping your sales team motivated will be helpful to you. As always, the show notes for this podcast will be in the Sales Purpose blog, and you'll find that at salespurpose.com/session012. Also wanted to mention that I will put a couple links in the show notes with a couple articles that I wrote about CRM tools. One of them was my recommendation for HubSpot. Another link that I'll put in there is going to be another article I wrote about how to use your CRM tool effectively as a salesperson and how to use that. And then I want to always mention that this is the official podcast of the Sales Mastermind community on Facebook, and that is where we will continue the conversation that we started here to answer Craig Sherlock's question. And I will put the question over on the Facebook group and allow those members of the Facebook group to also chime in and give answers for Craig Sherlock. Then also, if you want your question to be answered here in the Sales Mastermind podcast, you can go to salespurpose.com/SM podcast, and you'll see several different ways there that you can submit your question to be answered here on the podcast. Hope that you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will look forward to talking to you guys again on the next podcast. We'll see you then. Thank you for listening to the Sales Mastermind podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes below for any resources or sites mentioned in the podcast. Also be sure to subscribe and join the Facebook community to continue the conversation. Here's to your success.